You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week group program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your chances of conception, either now or in the near future, we have a spot for you. We start in January. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 289. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm sharing a new installment of my Fertility Awareness Reality series. And in today's episode, I'm sharing an on-air session with my client, Stephanie, who is currently a member of my Fertility Awareness Mastery live 10-week group coaching program. And so at the time of the recording, when we recorded this episode, we just completed week 9. So we're almost at the end of our episode. And it's interesting, if you were to go back and listen to some of the Fertility Awareness Reality series episodes, depending on how long my clients have been on in the program, you kind of just get a sense of how comfortable and confident they are with the method. So when I'm interviewing my clients towards the end of the program, when we already had 9 weeks together, and Stephanie and my case, we had 2 live sessions in our group. We also had a private session, and we also had all the time for questions and all the different points of contact that we have in the group. So as you can hear, by the time we're recording this episode, she's feeling fairly confident, quite confident actually with her charting, on her charting journey. She's still experiencing some post-pill effects, so things like short luteal phase and irregular cervical mucus patterns, which is very, very typical for women who have recently come off of hormonal birth control, particularly women who have a history of long-term use of hormonal birth control. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Stephanie. And I'm excited to be here today with Stephanie. Stephanie is a member of our current Fertility Awareness Mastery 10-week group program. And we actually had a hot seat session. So we did a chart review in our session last night. And last night we also had our 9th session. So Stephanie and I have been together for a little over 2 months. We've had at least 2 cycles charted together. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to jump right in and just get a sense from you. What, if is your birth control history? Have you used birth control before? If you did, how long? If you remember back when you had your first menstruation and kind of what led you to hormonal birth control, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think I was maybe 12 when I got my first period. It was New Year's Day. I remember waking up and seeing it. And my mom's like, go talk to your sister. So yeah, I didn't really know much about it. Basic sex ed, didn't really cover it. And I think I was about 16 when I did go on birth control because my mom was always, I'd rather you come to me and say you want to get on birth control than come to me and say you're pregnant. So it was like birth control it was. So that was just the norm. I think looking back, I'm probably glad that I did do that, because I don't think I would have ever been responsible enough to actually like go through the charting and everything, because I was not getting pregnant in my teenage years. Like, I did not want to have a baby until I was ready to have a baby. So I was still like, I guess if I would have known then what I know now, I probably still would have done it just for the responsibility. I just maybe wouldn't have stayed on it for so long. So I was on birth control, and from the time I was 16 consistently, and it was the pill, until we decided to have a baby, which was when I was 29. So quite a while. And then I got pregnant right away, like within 2 weeks, probably. So I got pregnant right away, and then carrying the baby, then the breastfeeding. I went on like the progestin only birth control pill. And then I was on that for maybe 2 or 3 years after my daughter was born, and then switched to the IUD. And that was maybe 2.5 years ago. And then I just had that taken out in August, and that's when I've been charting since then.
Well, I appreciate you going through and sharing your experience on birth control, and also reflecting back. Even if I had known, I would have still used birth control. And I think that's really important to highlight. I mean, on the show, as you know, I talk a lot about birth control, and I really try to kind of maintain clarity on my stance, which is that
Right.
Informed consent is what's the most important thing. And there are women, myself included, who would probably have gone on birth control as well, because I used birth control in my teens because of period pain.
Yeah.
And if I look back, of course, it would have been lovely if I would have known different ways to manage that, but I didn't.
Yes. Right. And I think that, like I said, I probably just wouldn't have done it for as long. If I had been out of my teens and into my like 20s and mid 20s, and I had discovered fertility awareness method at that point, I maybe would have been more open to going that direction versus just continuing with the pill, especially because, I mean, I didn't ask a lot of questions when I went on the pill. It was like, all right, great. I'm not going to get pregnant. That's all I needed to know. And whereas like now later, you know, I'm in my late 30s and I'm feeling more like aware of my body and wanting to know more about it and wanting to be like, know the science behind everything. Like, I didn't think to even ask those questions back when I was a teenager. And so a lot of the fertility awareness has just been educating myself too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that you mentioned, I love that you got your period on New Year's Day, like Happy New Year's.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that you were about 12 years old when you first started menstruating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you went on the pill at 16. And in your case, from what, like based on the time frame, that means that you had 4 years of cycling prior to going on birth control. Do you remember at all what your periods were like before you went on birth control?
Yeah, they were pretty, I would say they were fairly normal. Like, I never got into a big routine of tracking a lot. Like, I would kind of like look forward in the calendar and kind of estimate when I thought I would get my period just to be prepared. But they were fairly normal. I would say I didn't have any type of period pain. I never really was like, got a lot of cramps. I would get lower back pain. And I would even get that when I was on the pill. Like anytime, like before my bleed would start, I would just get like half a day of lower back pain, take an ibuprofen, and I was good to go. So I would say it was fairly regular, fairly normal from my perspective. Probably like 4 days of bleeding. I couldn't tell you exactly how long in between my cycles were, but it seemed like I regularly got them every month. So it seemed like I wasn't going through like anovulatory cycles or delayed ovulation or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't recall like specifics about it from back then.
Well, I point that out because every woman's experience is so different. But when you had a period of time when you were normally cycling and your cycles were able to mature and you were not, there's no such thing as a perfect cycle, but if you had gone 3-4 months without a period a bunch of times, you would have remembered that.
Yeah.
So I just think that's really important to highlight, because in your case, when you did come off the pill, you ovulated
Right away. Yeah.
and got pregnant right away. And so for some women who are listening who may have had a different experience, I just think it's helpful to have some context there. So I've spoken to a number of women and worked with a number of women who did have irregular cycles or were put on the pill basically immediately after they started menstruating. And so this is a different situation. And I just wanted to kind of point that out.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do remember, I believe it was in your book that really talked about people who go on to the pill to regulate their cycles. They find that when they come off, they still have similar cycles to what they had prior to pill use. So right now it seems irregular, but that's a lot of it from like the post-pill syndrome and things like that I experienced. So I'm hopeful that once I get through this time of transition, that it will go back to being somewhat quote unquote normal. But I guess time will tell.
Well, and so share with us then. So now you're transitioning. You had the IUD removed, and it was hormonal IUD that you had removed. And so you're transitioning to fertility awareness. So share with the audience whether you're planning to use fertility awareness to avoid or conceive, and kind of what prompted you at this stage then to make the switch.
So I am using it to avoid, and I was really actually kind of terrified about the idea of not having that like safety net of hormonal birth control. But I've been on kind of a health journey, if you will, over the last few years. And it started with learning the proper foods to eat. And then it started with learning to balance my hormones in like more so related to like digestion, your leptin and ghrelin and insulin and blood sugar and stuff like that. And then I realized like I have all these other hormones that I don't even know what they're doing. And so it just kind of prompted me to explore that a little bit more and realize like I'll never truly know the state of my actual hormones until I stop exposing my body to synthetic and unnatural hormones. So once I read your book and realized like, okay, this makes sense. I think I'm at a good point in my life where I could logistically do this. And I think this is the right thing that I need to do for my body. Like I don't have any serious like health issues or health concerns that have been diagnosed or gone undiagnosed. I just tend to be very proactive with my health and really want to do this for the rest of my life and the longevity to just maintain good health and not have to worry about all of these other things that may come up with our hormones being out of balance or whatever reason. So just do what I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of women reach that point at some point where it's kind of like, I've been using these hormones for a long time. I wonder what is actually going on.
Yeah.
Like, what would my body do? What would I ovulate normally? Like, what would my cycles be like? So I think it's really normal to be wondering that. And one question for you. So when you were sharing about your experience on the pill, did you find that it was fine? In your case, did you experience side effects?
Oh my gosh. I had a normal experience on it. It was never like I didn't experience acne. I didn't really experience PMS outside of just like, I tend to just be kind of not really moody, but just reactionary and bold. And some people want to, misconstrue that as chi or whatever, but that's just my personality. So it's nothing necessarily related to my period or anything. So I had a fairly positive experience, to be honest. Now, when I was on the IUD, I did actually go on that to not have a period, but then I was having something. Like every month it was like a couple days of spotting. And maybe I needed to use like a tampon. And then I was like, well, why am I doing this if I'm still actually getting a period? And then I discovered fertility awareness and I was like, all right, well, let's just get it all out.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the questions I've gotten asked here and there over the years, as you can imagine, is, are you going to interview anybody who didn't have issues on the pill? Because a lot of, especially my pill reality series, I mean, the purpose of that series is to give women who have had side effects and experienced it a place to talk about it and to
Sure.
to kind of, I just think it's important because so many women who have side effects are they're, minimized and, oh, it can't be that, or let's try a different one. So with that said, I mean, that's kind of the purpose of that series. But I think it's also important to just share experiences of women who didn't have a negative experience, because obviously every woman doesn't have a negative experience with hormonal birth control.
Yeah, and I never really had a negative experience. And as far as side effects, like noticeable side effects were not really there. But then I don't really know from all the research, there's all the nutrient depletion and things. So like I've never actually had a lot of those things tested to see how deficient I actually was in those. So I'm sure there was those unseen side effects too that I just was completely ignorant to.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we've spoken about, so at the time that we're recording this, I think last night for my calculation, you probably know already, but you just entered into your 5th cycle post IUD. So similar to when you came off of the pill to conceive, your cycle returned pretty much right away. And so you've been cycling regularly since you came off a few months ago.
Yeah, as far as I've been ovulating, I've been having something of a period every month since coming off of it. So
I'll use that word normally loosely. Normally in the sense that there is ovulation and there is menstruation.
Exactly.
So some of the challenges that you've just been experiencing with your cycle that we've talked about are the luteal phase has shifted and varied. So it has been shorter than normal. So we talked about different ways to improve that. And also cervical fluid, that's been less than quote unquote normal production. But one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is that when you come off the pill, we have to expect this transition period. So what we've spoken about a lot is that when you come off the pill, you can't really expect to jump into like whatever you think cycle look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't expect to have perfect mucus patterns and to have a long enough luteal phase, because from what I've seen and from what we see in the research, it does take an average of 9 to 12 cycles before everything really normalizes. It doesn't mean that we can't do things to, as you mentioned, replenish nutrients that were depleted and work on specific things that we're seeing. I think it's important not to get don't be alarmed. Don't be really alarmed if the first 4 to 6 cycles are still looking like they need a little bit of work.
Yeah. And I think that in the beginning, I was actually trying to do this on my own. I was like, I'll just read the books and get the charting apps or your charting book, and I can figure this out. And then just being in your Fertility Friday Facebook group, I would post questions and everyone was like, well, what kind of method are you using? I'm like, there's different methods. I didn't even know this. I don't know. This is what I'm doing. And I just found that I wasn't getting the right support and I needed it because I am that 0 on the scale.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that we've spoken about that is challenging. So when your cycle, so just to kind of paint a picture, I'm looking at your charts. I'm just going to pull up the first chart as well. But so one of the challenges is that when you come off the pill, there's a certain percentage of women who either produce very low amounts of mucus or have what are called dry cycles, meaning that they're checking for mucus every day and they're not actually seeing it. However, they are ovulating. So we've talked a little bit about that. Your cycles haven't been dry. You have seen some degree of mucus, but quite minimal. And we're not really seeing clear, stretchy, but you are ovulating. And so the challenge when you have a cycle like that is that pregnancy is possible in any cycle that ovulation occurs. Mm-hmm. So we know the crucial role that mucus plays in conception. But what I found is that when there's an issue so when you are actually ovulating, it means that you're producing enough estrogen to trigger ovulation. So we can discuss the nuances. Maybe estrogen levels could be higher or lower, but you're still producing sufficient estrogen to trigger ovulation. So when you're having a situation where you're actually ovulating, but you're not really producing mucus, that is telling us that your cervix is likely just not responding to the estrogen.
Okay.
And that's something where we know that longer term use of hormonal birth control is associated with some degree of a reduction in mucus production. So we know that. This is a pattern that I've seen. So the challenge then is that even though you're not necessarily seeing normal mucus patterns yet, you still have to consider yourself fertile as you approach ovulation in your follicular phase.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some of the strategies because as you mentioned, you're a 0 on the scale, so no babies, no pregnancy. So in this transition phase, what that means is that you got to be very cautious, particularly in the pre-ovulatory phase. My recommendation is to at least wait until you start to see a normal pattern, until you start to kind of move out of the transition phase and your cycle starts to normalize before you consider pre-ovulatory unprotected sex at all. So we've talked a lot.
Yeah.
So maybe just let me know what, if anything, that you wanted to focus on today, what questions that you had, if there's anything that you wanted to go over a little bit.
I mean, I feel like at this point I am comfortable identifying ovulation and understanding my temps. Like, I'm pretty regular and good about taking my temperature and recording it and understanding when ovulation has occurred, to where I would say probably either this cycle or next cycle I would start going unprotected more often in the luteal phase. I'm optimistic that I did see a little bit more like peak quality mucus this time. Like, it's the first time I've had anything that I could stretch or pick up and stretch. So while as I've always had a little bit of mucus and things that I can see and identify as fertile quality, I just could never stretch it. And so I did have that for the first time. So that was exciting, actually, kind of weird that I'm like, yay.
I wanted to jump into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery, my 10-week group coaching program designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open for a limited time. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump back into today's episode. Well, I get that. First of all, I get that a lot because of the line of work that I'm in. I get a lot of excited emails and Facebook messages and like, I saw mucus today. So you're definitely in good company. I also think it's really helpful for the women who are listening who are either considering coming off hormonal birth control or who have come off of hormonal birth control and are feeling really nervous and anxious because they're not necessarily seeing what they would expect in terms of the quantity of mucus. What I've seen is that I have not seen it where it's permanent. I have seen women who come off birth control, and like I said, there's a small percentage of women just don't see any.
Yeah.
I think most women do see some degree. But however the case is, it's often less than you would expect. So in a healthy cycle, we would expect to have cervical mucus for 2 to 7 days, at least one day where you're seeing clear, stretchy, peak quality mucus 4 times or more. So that's in like an ideal scenario, healthy cycle. But post-pill, it takes a while. But I think what's important about your experience, so we are now 5 cycles in. So you came off the pill. We're recording this in November. This episode will either air December, January, depending on the schedule. And so you came off the pill in August, I believe. Mm-hmm. Or not. I keep saying the pill. You had the IUD removed in August. Sorry.
Yeah.
Force of habit. And so now that I feel like that gives the listeners just a sense of like August, September, October, November. And now we're starting to see peak mucus for the first time.
Yeah.
So when I talk about the transition phase, this is what it looks like. This is actually like not exactly like this. It can be different. And some women have mucus right away the first cycle. So I'm not making a generalization, but just to say that it can take some time. And overall, if you add all the years that you used hormonal birth control of some kind, I don't know if I wrote it down, but do you know about how many years overall?
20. Yeah. So, 16 to 30, well, okay. So let's say 16 to, 36 with a minus like maybe a year and a half total in there for, my pregnancy and breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the reason that I ask and highlight that is because there is a correlation there between the
Yeah.
duration of use and those types of things. But I say that not to be discouraging, because what I've seen is that I have not seen that it's permanent. And what I've seen, and part of the reason why I love doing this work and it's very encouraging on my client work, is because the body is very resilient. There's several nutrients that we know are impaired by pill use. So working towards, your diet is really clean, you're doing a lot in that area, replenishing some of those nutrients. Like, this is what the transition phase, these are the things that you can do to kind of make that transition phase as smooth as possible.
Yeah. And I will say it wasn't until, and this could just be coincidental, until I added in the B complex and the vitamin C and I had been taking Vitex, and I had just during my move and everything just had stopped taking a lot of my supplements. So I added those back in, and that's about when I noticed that I had that more peak quality mucus. So could be totally coincidental, could be correlated, who knows, but I just found that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to say, because especially when you're making several changes at once, it's hard to know, exactly which one it is. Not exactly like a scientific study, but one of the things that I always encourage, and that I'll encourage you to just pay attention to, are the patterns. So you did notice more mucus in this cycle. So then in the following cycle, we can kind of compare the two and see if it's about the same, if it's improving. And then as you get 2 months, like 3 months, 4 months, or 3 cycles, 4 cycles in, then you'll have a better sense of the pattern. And one of the things that is challenging, especially at the beginning of your charting journey, so when you haven't really, this would be cycle 5. So this is your 5th chart. So for me, I am always thinking of it in a different way. I'm thinking of like, well, what's your chart going to look like, in month 9 and month 12? And then having the ability to actually look over the charts to see the progress. See, I've had the privilege and benefit of seeing that situation for many, many clients, for myself over the years. So it's hard to see when you're in the thick of it. But as long as you continue to do the things that you need to do to optimize your hormone health and all those things, you typically, unless there's an issue, you typically do see overall improvements as you look at your cycles over time.
Right. And that was another reason too that I chose to go with fertility awareness, is so that when if those issues ever come up, I will know it first. Mm-hmm. And I will know more so like how to identify it and how to move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that we were talking about last night was your luteal phase length, because initially your luteal phase you mentioned did you say initially it was maybe 9-10 days long?
Yeah, I would say probably like first cycle after the IUD. I'm looking it up right now. My luteal phase was 10 days, and then it went to 12. And then I moved and had a kid with a broken arm and a sickness, and then it went to 8, and then 8, and now to be determined.
Yeah. So we spent a bit of time talking about that, especially when you're using fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy. It's nice to, overall, it's important for our health. Having a strong, robust luteal phase ensures that we're getting adequate progesterone. For practical reasons, when you're avoiding pregnancy, it's nice to have a good, long, robust luteal phase, because then you have a date where you can have unprotected sex and not be concerned about the possibility of pregnancy.
Right. So like last night, I know I had mentioned that by the time I ovulate and give myself that count of 3, that's leaving me 4 days with an 8-day luteal phase to have unprotected sex. Well, if those days don't fall on convenient days, then it's just not happening. So it's been more challenging to try to get that in and to at least rip the Band-Aid off and give it a try. And at least I do know that if I do on day 5 and I have an 8-day luteal phase, I only have to wait 3 days to just confirm that everything is kosher.
Yes. Well, and I mean, there's part of it being that we're in the transition phase, but part of it appeared to be related to stress, given that your luteal phase shortened since your first couple of days. And there was all like the 1 month, definitely there was a lot of stress, given that you mentioned your daughter had broken her arm and you were moving and all those things. So we talked about just some of the general things like of stress and transition phase. We also talked about some specific strategies, just making sure that we're covering our bases. One of the things that I found is that once you identify what it is that is likely causing the stress or causing the progesterone to drop too soon, then you do typically, like if as long as you hit it, as long as you figure out what it is, then in the following cycle, you typically see improvement. So for some of my clients, it's related to their exercise habits. For some of my clients, they're skipping meals. For some of my clients, they're not getting enough sleep. So it's really tailored and individual based on what is going on. So we'll
Sure.
see how it works.
Yeah, I could definitely see stress being one of the big things. And then I'm working on just eating enough. I'm going to switch to the decaf. I bought some decaf today. So.
Did you find a kind that you like? I know decaf coffee depends on the brand. It can taste a lot different to the regular.
I don't know. I mean, I usually like to do like a whole bean and grind it, and I like a dark roast. So there was one selection at our specialty store here, so might as well give it a try. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, keep us posted. Let us know how it all goes. So as we bring our call to a close today, first of all, were there any other questions or anything that you wanted to go into?
I don't think so. I'm feeling pretty good and confident, and like I have a really good understanding now of the method. And so, yeah, I feel good.
Mm-hmm. It's always interesting, depending on at what stage that we're in when I do the recording. By the time that we're in our 9th and 10th week of the program, it means we've really hashed out so many things. So you've already had so many opportunities to ask questions, and it's a good place to be in.
Yeah,
definitely. And so for the listeners who are taking hormonal birth control and listening to different episodes of the podcast and starting to decide, is this something that, or maybe they're considering coming off birth control and they're kind of nervous about making that transition to fertility awareness or just the transition and not being on hormones. What, if anything, would you want to say?
Well, I mean, obviously everyone has a different experience with it and it's up to that individual person. But I did find that taking your class really was paramount for me. I don't think that I would feel this confident at this point in my charting experience had I not signed up for your class. And I was hesitant. Like, I've been listening to you on your podcast for months, like talking about this. And I was like, oh, I can do it on my own. And then I was like, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And so that really was huge for me, because I think that without the confidence to do this the right way, especially for avoiding pregnancy, I just would have had this constant doubt and even more stress, which would have probably exacerbated the issues that I already am having. So I think that was really helpful. Also, the more you know, right? So I feel like just educating yourself, I probably would have gone off birth control much sooner than I did had I just been more educated about it and taken it upon myself to really dive in and just understand what this really does do to my body. I didn't even know that I was not a real period.
Well, you're not alone in that.
I know, right?
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think that it's important for us as women just to have options and to have information, and for our health professionals not to feel nervous for telling us the full story about the medications that we take. Yeah. There's this tendency to not want to tell all of the side effects because, maybe the chance of getting the side effect is so low. But I feel like I often said it in our group, I'm like, we're all adults here. And we have the right to kind of know what's going on, because that allows us to make the decisions that are best for us.
Yeah.
Based on what we know.
And I don't really care to just take pharmaceuticals anyways. So with that mindset, I mean, I don't even like to take Aleve or ibuprofen if I can avoid it. So with that mindset, I'm like, well, why do I not want to take that? But I'm totally willing to have this device implanted in my body doing who knows what it's doing, you know? And so I kind of was like, seems like an oxymoron to proceed, or, you know, hypocritical. So that was a big motivator for me as well, is just one less thing that is synthetic that I'm trying to do to regulate, you know, whatever. I'd rather try always the most natural way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in one part of your story, you mentioned that when you were a teenager, it was definitely the best choice for you at the time, because you mentioned that you just, even knowing what you know now, you didn't feel confident in your ability to follow all those rules and do the charting consistently and et cetera. And I think that it's an important point just to highlight, because there's certain decisions that we would make for ourselves when we're in our late teens, early 20s, based on our maturity, our life experiences, where we're at. But the challenge is that if we don't have these types of conversations, you can grow and change and get to a different stage in your life and still be following the same rules you made for yourself when you were 16.
Right.
So it's something that, I mean, I have a different perspective, of course, because I was charting when I was like 18. So from my perspective, I definitely appreciate that it's not for everybody, but I also appreciate that for women who want to do it, they can figure it out. That's one thing, because it's not like you can force someone to chart their cycles. People are only going to do this if they want to and if they choose to. But I think that it's interesting, because I've had a number of conversations with women who are fully in their 30s and grown women, careers, complicated lives, children. And it's kind of this, I don't think that I would be able to avoid pregnancy. And there's always a part of me that's like, you may have made that rule for yourself when you were 16 because you weren't confident in your ability to do it. But I don't know if we all need to be following the same rules in our 30s that we made for ourselves when we were teenagers.
Right. And I think that only each individual person is going to know themselves well enough to know if, I mean, it is something that every day you have to think about and every day you have to keep track of. And if you're not the type of person that knowing yourself, you can actually see yourself doing that, then a different method might do better. But I think that you just have to trust your instincts and give it a shot if you think you can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think those are great words to end on. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show and being so open and candid with your experience and sharing a positive experience about hormonal birth control, so that we can kind of round it out a little bit. So I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/289. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Stephanie, and I just wanted to send a quick thank you once again to Stephanie for coming on the show and sharing her experience. I think it was a really great opportunity to hear from somebody who had a relatively positive experience on hormonal birth control, whose cycle returned fairly quickly after she stopped taking birth control. And as we spoke about on the show, there were a couple important pieces of that story that I think are important to highlight. One is that in Stephanie's case, even though she did begin taking hormonal birth control in her teens, she had several years of normal cycling before she was ever put on birth control. So in that sense, her cycles had the opportunity to normalize, to regulate on their own as just a normal part of puberty. And as she talked about on the show, she remembers her cycles being fairly consistent. She didn't really skip any cycles. She didn't have any particularly long cycles. She didn't remember having irregular periods or anything like that. Everything was fairly normal. And so I think that that's a really important part to highlight in her story, especially if you're listening and thinking, well, I didn't have an experience like that, or it took my cycle so long to return. I wonder why that was. Many women are put on birth control pretty much right away when they start menstruating. And I've recently spoken to a couple of women who were put on birth control before they even had their first period. And in those instances, when I did hear that experience, it was typically women who were already 15, 16, hadn't had their first period, but were highly, highly athletic. So we've spoken about all, so many different aspects of the connection between menstrual cycle health and overall health. And so for me, when I hear stories like that, I think, well, why wasn't the doctor looking at the level of exercise and making sure that that girl was getting enough to eat, and just covering those basic things that we would hope and expect that our health practitioners would be looking at. So I think it's really also in terms of Stephanie's experience having her period return right away. When she was ready to conceive, she came off the pill and she ovulated about 2 weeks later. So in her case, there was no real delay in terms of that. And I think it is important to highlight those stories, because not every woman does have this long delay from when she comes off of hormonal birth control and starts cycling again, but many women do. And so I think that it's just really important to have that concept in mind. So at this stage as well, so Stephanie recently had the IUD removed. And so she recently came off of hormonal birth control again. And although she did ovulate pretty much right away and she went right into cycling once again, I think it's important to mention that transition period. So all women who have been on hormonal birth control, particularly women who have taken hormonal birth control long-term, so long-term is 2 years or more, will go through a transition period. So they'll go through a temporary period of subfertility where their cycles are not falling completely into the normal parameters. So even if a woman starts ovulating right away and, she's getting her periods, if we actually look at all the different aspects of the cycle, if we look at how long is the follicular phase, are you producing, cervical mucus before ovulation? And what are those cervical mucus patterns like? Are those patterns normal? How long is your luteal phase? So after ovulation, how long does it take for your period to return? Are you seeing any spotting? Do you have any episodes of abnormal bleeding? How is your period? Is your period, normal? Is it on the light side? Is it on the heavy side? Are you experiencing any pain? Are you experiencing PMS symptoms? Are you experiencing acne? So when we actually look at the cycle as a whole and we're looking at whether it's falling into those normal parameters, for women who have just come off of hormonal birth control, particularly women who have used it long term, will find that there is a period of time, and on average it takes anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles, which typically adds up to about 12 to 18 months for many women, before all of those parameters really start to normalize and their cycles start to then become robust again. So this is the piece that I always want to draw attention to whenever we're talking about hormonal birth control, which is that there is this temporary period where your body has to shift. I mean, you've suppressed your normal hormone production for, in many cases, years. And so it would make logical sense that it might take a few cycles for everything to normalize. And for those of you who are either in that situation where you've been on hormonal birth control for a while and you're thinking of making the transition to a non-hormonal method, so you're wanting to use fertility awareness to successfully avoid pregnancy, or for those of you who are planning to conceive, whether it's right away or within the near future, or whether you just want to have a better understanding of the connection between your cycles and your health. So whatever camp that you fall into, we do have a spot for you in my upcoming 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery live group coaching program. And so if you're listening to this in real time, early bird registration is open, and you can find details over at fertilityfriday.com/group program. So make sure to head over there. Sign up. We'll be starting in January, and I'm really excited to start the new year off strong, and also by focusing on the connection between our menstrual cycle, our health, and empowering you to make the best possible decisions about your health and your fertility. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. And I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for tuning into the show. I appreciate all of you for supporting the show, sharing episodes with your friends, spreading the word about the show. I see all of you tagging your friends on social media and sharing episodes and just really getting the word out there about body literacy. And so I appreciate all of you for that. And with that, I will let you go. Have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're listening to the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.